What do the ancient Greeks, ancient Babylonians, ancient Chinese, ancient Egyptians, and the ancient Romans have in common? Other than being ancient, of course. They all conducted regular censuses of their population. Why do they do this? Probably for many of the same reasons that we do it today. Census information helps us plan roads, schools, and other public services. Census data is used by businesses to plan for their economic growth and well-being. And census data is used in all manner of sociological, economical, and historical research. Our Constitution requires that we do a census every 10 years to gather information for reapportionment of the seats in our House of Representatives. The first such census was conducted in 1790. 650 U.S. Marshals traveled the country knocking on doors, counting how many people lived there, and taking down the names of the heads of households. It took them 18 months to count 3.2 million people. In 1810, the government decided for the first time that they wanted to collect information on manufacturing and productivity capabilities during the census. So they added some questions in that regard. They did that again in 1820, but they found that the data was really poor because there was no requirement, and a lot of manufacturers refused to give them any information. So in 1830, they just reverted back to a simple count of the population during the 1830 census. In 1840, they decided to add some questions on social factors for the first time. They asked questions about education, occupation, literacy, and idiocy. They were trying to find out how many mentally ill people there were in the country. 1850 saw some really major changes in the census for the first time. For the first time, the census gathered detailed information on every member of each household, not just the head of household. They gathered information on age and ancestry, where their parents were born, and a variety of other things. In addition, Congress decided that they wanted to try again to get manufacturing information, so they had a detailed schedule that went out asking for manufacturing information and agricultural productivity. They had a section that was asking about slave ownership. They had a whole lot of other sociological factors that they were looking for as well in that census. So it was a much bigger undertaking. And by that time, our population had grown to 23.2 million people. Over the next 30 years, the population doubled. In 1880, it was more than 50 million people. Up to that time, and including the 1880 census, all the data was tabulated by hand. It took them about 8.5 years to completely finish the 1880 census before they got the results out. One of the agents working on that was a man named Herman Holrith. And obviously he knew what difficulty it was, and so he invented a machine, a mechanical tabulating machine, that could be used to count the census in time for the 1890 work, so that they could use it to vastly speed up the time it took to come up with the results. He later formed a company to market that tabulating machine, and after a couple of mergers, that company became what we now know as the IBM Corporation. 1890 census was historic in another in addition to being the first time the results were mechanically tabulated. It really marks the end of the era of westward expansion in our country. They found that from that point forward, the growth in the West was really a matter of just filling in holes rather than expanding into new territories. So it's historical in that event. Through 1880, the census had always been conducted by the federal marshals, the U.S. Marshal's Office. But in 1880, for the first time, they hired special census workers to conduct each census, and then they were laid off after the census was complete. And a permanent Bureau of the Census wasn't established until 1902. It now resides in the Department of Commerce. The next significant changes came about in the 1940 census. We now had over 150 million people, and data collection was a huge, huge undertaking. So the first time statistical sampling was introduced to reduce the burden of taking samples, they didn't gather all the information from everybody. They just did it from statistical sampling. In 1960, there were also a couple of major changes. For the first time, computers using optical scanning devices were used to count the census results. And this made a huge advance over even the mechanical tabulators that had been used up to that time. Also, mail was used to collect census data for the first time in 1960. And then enumerators only went out to the houses that didn't respond, so it really cut down on the amount of people that had to go out there and do that. In 2010, we're once again only going to be collecting population data with the mailed-out census. The Census Bureau conducts over 100 additional surveys during the years between the decennial censuses, and they're going to gather all the other information using that technique rather than asking for it from each individual citizen to provide the long list of detailed information that they used to ask for. How much does it cost to conduct a census? In 2000, it cost $4.5 billion. Each of you can help keep the cost of the 2010 census down by returning your census forms on time so they don't have to send out enumerators to your place to gather the data. So I encourage you all to please stand up and be counted in 2010.